Hi, this is a podcast for my creative media project. When I first jumped into this project, I immediately went, I want to make a gun. Now, the original idea was I'd make some kind of rifle, perhaps, something like this that came apart. I slightly moved towards, let's do something post-apocalyptic, spikes, rust. Then I got into kit guns, someone who's turned a pistol into a rifle, or, a pistol with a huge bayonet type thing on it, this kind of thing where you completely change the form of the weapon. Now, all of these things are interesting, they're very well made, they're really cool to look at, but after a conversation with a lecturer, we very quickly came to the conclusion that a gun was not the best portfolio piece in the world. Mainly because lots and lots of people do guns. If you look on ArtStation is completely saturated with things like AK-47s, shotguns, that kind of thing. Because everyone thinks, I want to be a prop artist, I'm going to make guns. When in actuality, a prop artist is more likely to be making environment props, story pieces. Say if you look towards something like The Last of Us, that game perhaps had somewhere in the region of 3 to 5 guns, but the whole point of the game was it is completely narrative driven in a beautiful environment full of handmade props that whisk the player on a wonderful adventure. So that's the direction I've chosen to take this project in. The next question was, what should I make? I knew I wanted to make a piece of machinery of some kind. I knew I wanted it to be in a 1950s, 1960s style. That being some kind of big clunky machine, which at the time was the peak of technology, and to our eyes would be unbelievably obsolete. But I wanted to set it in a world where this technology was either extremely rare perhaps, or in a fallen society where, even though we would perceive it to be some kind of redundant garbage essentially, to them it is a holy grail item. So parts of it would be extremely dilapidated, but perhaps the more intricate parts would be fixed and replaced and meticulously cleaned, and I would want to have some kind of narrative going along so you can tell that someone has found this and they're replacing the important part. I eventually landed on the IBM 726. It was a magnetic tape data bank, part of a larger collection of machines that would run a computer. It weighed a mighty 600 kilograms and was able to store 3.6 megabytes of information, which, of course, by our standards is extremely archaic, but for 1952 it was cutting edge. You can imagine this fitting quite nicely into a Cold War era game, or something like the Metro series, where it is more Cold War, or even something like Fallout, where it is set in the future, but we still have this aura of Americana and everything's in this sort of 1950s bulky manufacturing style. So from here I'll take this forward. To round out my rationale and background research for the IBM 726, I picked this computer because I thought it would be an unexpected item. It's quirky, it's interesting, it can hold a narrative easily. It will stand out from the crowd in a sea of other props, and due to its time period, I can connect it to something like Metro. It will give me a good breadth of comparative work and research to see how mine's going, to see how it stands up in the industry standards. So, heading through development, we're going to start in 3ds Max with my low poly on the left here, my high poly on the right. I used traditional modelling techniques when it came to the modelling of the actual props. I would say the only places I went out of the norm was on these front doors here and these front panels, using face weighted normals just to completely flatten out these faces. I was having a little bit of trouble on these curves, and as you can see here, developing a kink in the front faces in the normals, which was going through onto the bake. So just using the face weighted normals plugin, I flattened these up quite nicely, nice and crisp for the final bake. And the only thing that was a little special as well was the use of some floaters just to get some normal data. These rivets, screws, the little rivets in here, just additional details to make the actual prop sing a little, and so I didn't have to hand place them all in Substance Painter. This is my first attempt at baking the mesh. As you can see, there are some real bad problem areas here, here, the areas I was talking about earlier, and this just results in the mesh just being essentially unusable. There's no point of even carrying on, so it was a case of go back, tweak the meshes, tweak the normals, tweak the weighted normal scripts, and hopefully we'll eventually get a result that I was happy with, which we did. And this is the final outcome. As you can see, all of our problem areas are dealt with, our flats are nice and flat, no more kinks in the mesh, and then the normals, our curves curve around nicely, and our hard edges are nice and softened out. So I would say this mesh is in a prime position to be taken forward to texturing. Now, we went through quite a few different variations before I really found my footing, but we'll go through some of the key ones. This is my first attempt of a texture pass on the IBM 726. As you can see, it is full of problems. This is with the old bake, so you can see these big creases in it and the kinks over here. Even in places where the actual bake wasn't a problem, it is far too noisy, far too messy. The rust is not realistic. It just isn't how rust forms, something I know now in hindsight. So overall, I think this was a good learning experience, but a very poor outcome. Here we have my second real attempt at making one. I went very much in the opposite direction of the last, where the last was very, very noisy. This one, I went very flat. As you can see, it's really just not working again. This is once again before I have fixed the normals. You can see them really kinking in here. And I tried to go for a sort of a dirty dust effect, but ended up making it mainly look just quite blurry in places, especially around here. Doesn't really make sense that it's in here. So once again, I learned a lot from this attempt, but it was really just not what I was looking for a final outcome by any stretch of the imagination. On attempt number 3 here, as you can see, there are still some issues. This height map too hard up here. The randomness of the dirt, it looks too just placed over the top, whereas I went in a more realistic direction with the rust in areas that make sense. These kind of places, a nice patch here spreading out like a damp patch. Having some issues with the duplicated UVs where it's becoming perhaps too obvious, and this was a good attempt in my opinion. I think I was going in the right direction with this one, but it could do with a little bit more work. And here we are on the most up-to-date version of the IBM 720 that I've done. As you can see, we've toned down the dirt a little bit. I eventually got around to adding some glass, something I was actually unaware you could do in Substance Painter. I just never attempted it before. And I think this is really coming together. I've got the different levels of roughness going on. I've got the rust the way I want it. Not to say that there aren't issues, of course. I need to take this forward, I need to complete it. Areas that I think I'm going to focus on is as much as I think this sort of dirt perhaps is not the most sensical. I think it does add something, but I need to go in with some more hand-painted stuff in areas you'd expect. I need to add a little bit more rust in areas you'd expect, along the top here, in the corners where it would press against here. There would be paint chipping, therefore there'd be rusting. I solved a little bit of the problems with the duplicated UVs, but I feel like this area, obviously mirrored here, is still an issue. All of these share the same UVs, so perhaps just creep that back down a little bit. And then it's adding some quirky elements, adding the narrative, actually fixing the project to become what I want it to be. Some evaluation points for the project so far. I think the only way to describe it is unfinished. I do think I'm on the right tracks given the record of previous examples. I think I'm really moving forward. I would say the learning curve for myself for Substance Paint has been extremely steep. Going into this, I knew that would be the case, but I think I've learnt a lot, and really I have learnt to try and stick away from the pre-generated masks, because it ends up looking very samey. Everyone uses the same masks. If you really want something, a prop to sing its narrative, it has to all be hand painted. I do think I've learnt a good process when it comes to Substance Painter, and most importantly, I still find this project fun to come back to. I still find it fun to do. I think every new version I do is the best Substance Painter work I've ever done. So that's sort of ideal for myself, for my personal evaluation. And lastly, I feel I've learnt a lot about how the real world works when it comes to texturing. I've learnt how rust works. I've learnt how dirt works, how it builds up, where it builds up. Rust doesn't just randomly appear on metal surfaces. It creeps in from areas of a lot of use. Handles, hinges, areas where two surfaces of paint touch each other constantly. It wears down, that metal comes out. The rust starts to eat away and chips more of the paint away. Really, it's been a fascinating project so far, and as I say, most importantly for me, I'm still enjoying it. I think it's going to be a standout portfolio piece. Lastly, we're going to run through a plan of completion here. It's mainly hammering down those last few points. The rust, there's a couple of places where you'd expect rust to be and there isn't, like up here a little bit, down the door, making sure to make the duplicated areas less obvious here and here. Really hammering home the dirt, getting some nice hand-painted dirts, different layers on height maps, different layers of roughness to get a real nice panning effect across it, so you can tell the patches that are rough, the patches that are not so rough, etc. Now I'll be using the rest of my time for that, bar the last week, and the last week will be wholly to do with lighting, because lighting, when it comes to a prop, especially a narrative prop, absolutely makes and breaks the project, makes and breaks the prop, hands down. I will most likely be using Marmoset Toolbag for that. I will experiment with HDRIs, but I dare say that it's probably not going to do quite what I want it to do. We'll be attempting to make a nice lighting rig, perhaps give it something nice to stand on, really hammer down just a beautiful scene which really pushes all the details, pushes all the colours, and it will just fit smack bam in something like Metro Exodus, be a perfect portfolio piece, be a perfect example of industry standard work. And that's everything from me for this project. I hope everything's made sense. Thanks for watching and listening.